Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second webinar of our series. Good morning, Ebru.
Good morning, Gaia. Good morning, everybody.
I'm here today with Ebru Koksal. I'm Gaia Preter and the Sustainability ESC. And as we announced during the last webinar, we have now joined forces in a partnership, European Football Clubs and Women in Football, for this series of webinars on leadership in football. So I just share with you a few slides. So the session today title is Not Script, Just Leadership, Authentic Presence on and off the pitch. Authentic presence is, of course, an important trait for any leader, man or women. So we hope that many men following this webinar will find it useful. As usual, this session will be recorded. You are not allowed to turn on your camera or to speak. If you have any idea, comments, or question, you can input it, type it into the dedicated Teams Q&A chat, or you can email us at sustainability@efcfootball.com. The recording of the session will be made available in the follow-up email and also on our EFC website. What's the agenda, Ebru, today?
Yes, so Gaia and I will do a quick introduction about what the Everyone's Game FC network is like, and also we will talk about some of the upcoming events and then pass it to our wonderful consultant, Nisha Vyas, whom we work very closely with at Women in Football. She will talk to us about the concept of authentic presence and give us some great tips and guidelines on how to be authentic leaders in the workplace. Then Faye will come on board and have an interview with one of the leading figures in global football, Laura McAllister, a good friend of Women in Football and an exemplary leader in everything she does in her day job. So we have an action-packed 1.5 hours with you, and let's get started, Gaia.
Yes. So our partnership is based on the development of this network that we name Everyone's Game FC, Football Club, let's say. And this network is in essence aimed at promoting more gender balance and more diversity in European football, and it's based on different types of activity for the first year. Then, of course, we will probably develop new ones. The first activity is a series of webinars during the whole solar year 2026. This is the second. We will have 8 in total. Every webinar will focus on a specific leadership skill, like authentic presence, be more ready, influence and persuasion. And then will be followed by an interview of a successful leader, like today with Laura McAllister.
We just had our one of our side events in Lisbon 2 days ago during the EFC Club Connect Women's Football, and where we had over 100 people listening to a conversation between Kelly Simmons and Ingrid Van Helle. And also, I talked a little bit about the importance of networking and how it's a very important asset for your toolbox as well. Our next event together again will be at the EFC General Assembly in Copenhagen.
Yes. Very looking forward to it. And then the third very important activity is the Women on Board program delivered with Women in Football. We are now having 2 editions per year. The next one is next week, actually. So we'll be starting on Tuesday. And the following one will be in August. The precise dates still to be announced. The Women on Board program is our flagship bespoke program developed by EFC Campus in cooperation with Women in Football to train, educate, identify potential board member for EFC and also, of course, for the boards of the clubs. Next appointment.
Yes, it will be on Friday, the 29th of May. And I think we all talk about inclusion quite a bit, but I have not really come across too many discussions why it's a competitive edge, because European club football scene is competitive, not only on the pitch, but also off the pitch as well. So we will try to explore in a two-part series together with Chris Gibbons how it gives a competitive edge to your club to have inclusion at the center of your strategy and strategic pillars. And we will announce the female or male leader to talk on this topic in due course as well.
And then this is part of our series. Here you can see the next dates. So first one, as Ebru said, 29th of May. The following one, so the second part will be 26th of June. And then we will stop for July and August. And we start again in September with allyship. And then we will have the side event at GA and other free webinars to be announced later on. A very important thing I would like to highlight today is that the design of the network's activities is based on research that we started in season 24-25 with interviews of female leaders working in football, and followed our last season by 20 interviews with men working in football. Then we had a workshop at the last General Assembly to identify which topic you would like to see, let's say, covered in the network activities. But now it's very, very important for us to validate our first assumptions via a quantitative study, so a survey that we have launched 2 days ago, and we're launching, let's say, to our broader membership today, whose aim is essentially validate the key insights that we collected from the interviews, inform future network activities, and most of all, also establish a benchmark to measure the impact of the network activities in the next season. So I'll show you now the QR code. You can scan it with your phone and fill the survey. It's aimed to both men and women. It takes, I would say, more or less 15 minutes to complete. I will show this slide again at the very end of the webinar, so you don't have to fill it now because now you have to follow the webinar, but we would really, really, really appreciate if you could take the time at the end of the webinar to fill the survey. It's really important for us to have good numbers, and the results then we can share in a webinar or at the side event at GA. So this is all for the overview of the webinar today and the network activity. I will invite now Faye Carruthers. This is our host for today. Hi, Faye. How are you? Welcome.
Thank you, Gaia. Lovely to be with you all this morning. I'm Faye Carruthers. I'm a proud member of Women in Football for almost 15 years now, I think. I'm a broadcaster and communications coach, and I've been working in football for almost 25 years, which which shows my age a little bit. We've got such a great session planned for you today, as Ebru and Gaia have explained, including a real privilege hearing from UEFA Vice President and Executive Committee member, Professor Laura McAllister. She's going to be telling us all about her leadership journey and how she shows up authentically while driving change in the game. And speaking of authenticity, to kick things off, I want to introduce you to executive coach and trainer Nisha Vyas. Nisha empowers people like you to step up to the next level and reach your full potential, delivering workshops like this to help you do that with freedom and ease. I've heard so many good things about Nisha's work, and I'm really looking forward to this session, which is focusing on authentic presence and empowerment. But I'm sure Nisha will tell you more about that. It's great to have you with us, Nisha.
Thank you, Faye. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Good morning, everyone. Hello, and thank you also, Gaia and Ebru, for a lovely introduction and a start of the day. It's lovely to be here with you all. Before we begin this session, I would just like to invite you all just to take a moment to be here fully present. I just invite you to give yourself some space. Take a moment to, if you can, just remove any distractions that you may have around you. Some of you may be multitasking, so feel free to just give yourself this time to maybe close down your emails and park any to-do lists that we may have for now and just absorb all that this moment has to offer. Take a breath. Whatever it is that you need to arrive and be fully present in this space. Thank you. So who am I? I'm going to just share my screen, so bear with me and hopefully you can all see that. So my name's Nisha and I am a professionally certified coach and trainer. I spent many years working in the football industry, working for organizations like Club Wembley. During the opening of Wembley Stadium, I worked on the Olympic football project with FIFA during the London 2012 Olympics, and I also worked for a number of years at Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. At Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. And whilst I absolutely loved working in the industry, I often felt quite challenged by the leadership dynamics in male-dominated environments, especially in football. And in 2018, after going on my own personal development journey and learning how to be a much better leader, not always being a great leader, but absolutely learning how to be a better leader, I realized I was not going to thrive in what sometimes felt like a toxic environment. And so I set myself a mission to transform and develop leadership in football. And this led me to take a leap of faith and train as a coach, eventually starting my own business. And it makes me smile when I say that because it really was a leap of faith and trusting, you know, my authentic presence. I'm truly passionate about helping leaders like yourselves, especially female leaders, but men and women, leaders across the football landscape, the global football landscape. And I've been fortunate enough to coach and train leaders for some of the biggest companies in the world, including Google, currently working with Deloitte, as well as iconic football establishments like Women in Football. I'm very, very proud to work in partnership with Women in Football. I've worked with FIFA, the Premier League, the English FA. I recently worked with a group of female leaders in Saudi Arabia and many more. And I'm based in London, but you will often find me in various parts of Asia, most recently in Indonesia, working and living in alignment to my authentic values, which are truly appreciating culture and diversity through travel. So that's me. And as I say, it's lovely to be here with you all. But let me ask you a question. And I believe we're going to have a poll coming up on the screen shortly. But how many of you feel like you are operating at your full potential as a leader? Just take a moment to reflect on that question. But how many of you feel like you are operating as at your full potential as a leader? I believe we have a poll hopefully coming up shortly for you to participate. If not, just feel free to reflect on that question. Can I just check if a poll will be launched?
Nisha is going on. You just need to give them a little bit more time to answer. I see. Yeah, I see now almost half replied. I can tell you at the moment there is quite a majority of occasionally.
Okay.
More than 50%. 14%, 13% is saying yes, and 33% is saying no. So clearly the minority is saying yes.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Gaia. Thank you for sharing that. I'm unable to see that. I'm going to thank you so much for that information. We're going to launch another poll now. And I want now an even more honest reflection. And I believe that there will be some similarities here. But how many of you feel like you can be fully yourself at work or in your professional environments? So we're just going to launch another poll. But how many of you, and again, I really want you to be honest, it's anonymous. So just answer honestly that you feel you can be fully yourself at work or in your professional environments.
Okay, here I can tell you there is actually a predominance of yes. We are 50%, It's a little bit more than 50% yes. No is only 9%, and
Okay.
occasionally is around 38.
Okay.
It's moving a little bit, more people are answering, but more or less that's 50, 10, and 40, more or less. Okay, just to give you an idea.
Thank you so much, Guy, and thank you everyone for participating, because in my experience, those two things are directly connected. So it's interesting where you might be sitting with both those questions. And yet, as leaders in football environments, especially, we've been conditioned to perform, to be strong, to have the answers, to fit in. And the cost of that is that many leaders are operating at half of their capacity. Not because they lack skills, not at all, but because they're disconnected from their authentic selves, not necessarily feeling like I can be who I am in those environments. And what is authentic presence? That really is the question. And so let me just share on my screen here. So authentic presence, according to the researcher and storyteller Brené Brown, some of you may have heard of. If not, I highly recommend listening to some of her talks. But in its simplest form, it's the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are at our core. The daily practice of letting go of who you think you're supposed to be. Take a moment. How often do we perform in environment because we don't feel that our authentic selves belong? And it may not be in your professional environment, it could be in other environments, but how often do we do that? So let me tell you my story. In 2018, I was sitting inside my football club. We were sitting in brand new offices, so new you could still smell the paint, the fresh paint from that office. And I'm sitting inside what was a clear glass meeting room. And that meeting room, coincidentally, was called 1981, one of the years that the club had last won a trophy, but coincidentally, the year that I was also born. And during a performance review with one of my senior leaders, I remember they looked at me and said, Nisha, you've hit your career ceiling. And in that moment, I felt absolutely crushed, almost as if the ceiling had caved in on me. And worse still, in that moment, I believed them. Because what I didn't realize at that time was I wasn't lacking capability, but I was truly disconnected from my authentic self. And here's the truth about football leadership. We coach players, but we don't coach leaders. There's something we don't talk about enough in football. You know, we would never put a team on the pitch without a coach, but we expect leaders to just figure it out. I speak to leaders day in, day out within the football landscape who are figuring it out. And the reality is, many environments in football are still driven by pressure, immense pressure, by ego, by performance, but not enough by people, by that humanistic element that really makes us who we are. And not just within football, but globally. And the global stats suggest this. 76% of employees experience burnout. 76% at some level. And I honestly believe this is higher in football, if I'm honest. And only 1 in 3 people can be themselves or feel like they can be themselves at work. And they're 2.5 times more likely to feel emotionally exhausted as a result. How often are we emotionally exhausted? So we're asking people to perform at elite levels in environments where they don't feel safe. And I'm not talking in the physical sense. but psychologically. So I'd love to just pause for a moment here and give you a chance to reflect again. So my question now is, how often do you feel like you're operating as your authentic self at work? Now, I know we asked a similar question, but I just want you to scale it, okay? So on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being never, 5 being always, where would you scale your authentic self?
I think they're thinking about it, Nisha.
That's okay.
Let's give them a little bit of
Yeah,
time.
take your time. Take your time. Just have a think. In your professional environments, where would you scale your authentic self? Thank you, Guy.
Yeah, that's true, because the answer could be different if you value it in your personal life, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's also not a given that personally we also feel authentic only personally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Maybe in a different way.
Yeah.
So I think here we have quite good statistics in any case, because there's a majority of 4. So
Okay.
52% is at 4.
Mm.
Only 8% is at 5. 9% is at 5. Then we have 32% is 3.
Okay.
2 is only 5%, and 1 is 0.
Okay. That's good. That's actually quite healthy.
Yeah.
Because most often the rooms will land at around the 3 mark, which means that most leaders aren't operating at their full capacity, or are operating at partial capacity. So my question to you is, if you're not a 5, are you operating at that partial capacity? Thank you so much, Gaia, for that. And it's just for reflection, here is when I lost myself. I stopped being myself. In 2012, the Olympics had come to an end, and I landed a managerial role within the commercial division at a Premier League club. And the moment I walked through the gates, I felt like I stopped being myself. I didn't feel like I belonged. And despite me coming in with a wealth of experience, the environment at times felt a little hostile. So as a result of this, I started to prove instead of lead. Does anyone recognize that sometimes we come in and we feel the pressure, like I need to prove myself here. I can't be myself, or I can't lead or trust the gifts that I have, or the reason why I'm here. And so every conversation for me became, am I saying the right thing? Do I look capable? What do they think of me? Am I good enough? Every day, those were the questions I was asking myself. And that's not leadership. That's survival. I spent day after day surviving rather than thriving. So imagine how many leaders you may know that spend their lives surviving and not thriving. I spent many years navigating my way through this. And I never realized that who I had become was essentially an ineffective leader. And there was a moment that changed me and the way I lead. And it was those words that you see on the screen, "It's you," that made the biggest difference to who I am and how I sit here in front of you today. So one of the biggest turning points in my leadership didn't come from a strategy meeting. It came from a moment at my desk in 2017. I was stressed, I was overwhelmed, whilst we were ending our time at a current stadium, moving into another temporarily, whilst also setting up for a brand new stadium. I was split across so many different venues and so many different projects. And I remember looking back, trying to do everything within that role myself. Because that's the nature of our job sometimes, right? I always used to say you need to be made of steel to work in this industry, of highly resilient. And one day, as I was working away at my desk, one of the juniors in my team started to cry. And I remember in that moment, if I'm being honest, feeling a bit frustrated at this. I was busy and I really didn't have time to deal with another issue. And I remember looking over at her and asking her, "What's wrong?" And she said, "It's you." She said, "Nisha, when you're stressed, it makes me stressed." And it was in that moment that I realized something truly uncomfortable. I wasn't leading. I was projecting my own pressure. And I knew that something had to change in that very moment. That night, luckily, I had a coach I was just starting to work with. I booked a call immediately with my coach. I was very honest. I took a moment to truly reflect on who I was being as a manager and a leader. And it was the first time I really saw how I was showing up. This is what happened. I was operating from control, not trust. So I started to be more honest. From that moment, everything changed. I started to be more honest with myself and the people around me. I involved my team more in conversation. I stopped trying to do everything myself. And what happened next was incredible. The team didn't just perform better, but they thrived. And so did I. Because leadership isn't just about what you do, but it's truly about how you make people feel. But my question is why? Why do we hold back sometimes in the space? And I want us to recognize that our beliefs drive our behavior. The biggest barrier to authentic leadership isn't the environment, but often it's the beliefs that we carry. And what is a belief? Well, in its simplest form, a belief is simply a story that we hold to be true or a narrative that we hold to be true. And many of us hold what is known as limiting beliefs. What's a limiting belief? A limiting belief is simply a story that we hold to be true, but actually it holds us back. It limits us from what we want to achieve. What might they sound like? What might some limiting beliefs sound like? So our beliefs drive our behavior. You might recognize some of these. I need to be perfect. I don't belong. I can't show my true self at work. I need to appear strong. I need to prove myself. And the list goes on. And we're not always consciously aware of these thoughts, but they're there. And these beliefs don't just sit in our minds, but they often shape how we lead. So some of us will argue that it's that belief that got me to where I am today. The truth is, you might go, well, I proved myself. I'm here. But I want you to know that the truth is that you achieved well despite having the belief. Telling yourself you're not good enough does not drive you. It adds stress and anxiety to your life whilst you work hard to prove your worth. When I'm here to tell you that all that time, you have innate worth. You have the skills, you have the experience. So shifting the narrative slightly can make you even more powerful. But how do we do that? How do we shift the narrative from I'm capable, I don't need to prove my worth? So I'm just going to share a story about a leader I worked with who often stayed silent. Sorry, I'll come back to this in a second. So who often stayed silent. I'm going to just stop sharing my screen for a second. Close this poll. So I worked with a senior leader in a football club, highly capable, highly respected. but they barely spoke in certain meetings, especially where senior leadership was present. Not because they didn't have any opinions, but because they didn't feel safe to challenge. The environment, as often as we are in these environments, was operating with a hierarchy, and sometimes that felt a little bit risky. And speaking up sometimes felt risky in that space. So what happened as a result of that? You know, we have this capable leader, but it feels risky to speak up. Problems weren't addressed. Decisions that needed to be made weren't challenged. And frustration over time started to build up. But whilst working with my client, when we reconnected them to their values being the things that are most important to him, two of his core values was honesty and trust, and he was not living in alignment to those values. In addition to this, we challenged the belief that it's not safe to speak up. Because in honesty, this belief was not true, and it also wasn't helpful. So why carry it? And often we're not consciously aware. So actually, with awareness of these beliefs and awareness of these values that they hold, they started to speak up. Not aggressively, but with the belief that it's safe to speak. It's safe to have a voice. It's safe for me to be authentically myself, in alignment with more self-trust. We hold the value of trust, but how often do we trust ourselves? And with that awareness, they were able to speak authentically. What do you think the impact was of that? In that moment and over time, not only were better decisions made, but stronger relationships were formed as a result of this. It created a ripple effect within the team and within the organization. Others recognized it's safe to speak, and others started to follow and contribute more, and do continue to this day, because authenticity is contagious. It truly is. How often have you been in a room and seen, oh, it's okay, that person's truly authentic, it's okay for them to be them. Why can't I give myself permission to do the same? Vulnerability is something that we don't necessarily like to talk about, or we may have an association with that word. But for me, vulnerability is courage. I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me. So let's talk about this. I want us to recognize vulnerability, as it says here, isn't a weakness, but it's a willingness to show up without certainty. In football, it's one of the most powerful leadership tools, and within any organization. But as I say, it's not a weakness. It's the willingness to show up without certainty. It's knowing that we don't always have the answers. And we don't need to have all the answers. We don't need to have everything figured out. You are human. I am human. We're human. And being human means we're not always okay. And that's okay. Leaders who can demonstrate this create psychological safety at its core. We build trust faster, not with individuals, but we create, not just within the individuals, but within these trusted environments, we create safer, collaborative environments. What's the impact of that? When we create trusted, safer, more collaborative environments, it unlocks much better performance all round. And I just want to come back to our core values. Values, essentially, is about alignment over performance. What is a value? In its simplest form, the values are things that are most important to us in different areas of our lives. And every single one of us sitting in this room today has a set of core values. things that are most important to you, not just in this area, but in every area of your life. We may not be consciously aware of them, but you might, for example, have a core value of kindness. And if you hold that core value, it's going to show up no matter where you are, whether you're at home or at work, within your professional environments. Aligning to our values creates inner harmony. As long as they're balanced. What do I mean by that? What I mean is it's no good being kind to everybody else and never taking that moment to be kind to yourself. So just take a moment to think, what are your values? Are they balanced? Are you in alignment with them? How do we know? I want us to recognize what changed for me wasn't confidence, but it was clarity. And I just wanted to take you back to that moment. I'm just going to go back. I want to take you back to that moment sitting in that office called 1981 and feeling like the ceiling had closed in on me. I want you to know I didn't know it at the time, but it truly clashed with one of my core values. And one of my core values is freedom. And when you're living out of alignment with your values, it drains you. Going back to the stats of burnout, I want us to recognize burnout isn't always associated or connected to workload and stress, but often burnout is connected to misalignment and self-abandonment to who we truly are as our authentic selves and what's most important to us. And so you saw my slide, I wanted to introduce a framework. This is a framework I use with leaders across football and global organizations. And it's very simple. It's as simple as ABC. So the first question I ask you just to reflect on is how much awareness do we have? What are you recognizing within yourself from this conversation today? How are you showing up? What are you starting to notice about yourself? You guessed it, beliefs. What story is driving you? What narrative do you hold about yourself? And some of them may be helpful and some of them may be true. Keep them. But which ones are limiting you? Which narratives do we hold about ourselves? Because I can assure you, often the way we speak to ourselves, we would never speak to a friend in that way. Is it helpful? Or is it limiting? And you guessed it again, core values. These are the essentials for my framework. Am I aligned with what matters to me? What is most important to me? Because when you're in alignment to your values, that feels like thriving. It truly does. And when you're out of alignment, it feels like surviving. Most of us, most leaders, most of you sitting in this space don't need more skills. But what we need is alignment. Taking the time to work on ourselves takes courage. It really does. And I truly appreciate each and every single one of you for being here today, because that takes something. But what I want us to recognize about leadership is it's not about your title and it's not about the office, but it's about the willingness to step up, put yourself out there and lean into courage. This takes courage. And I have taken that from the wonderful Brené Brown. So I ask you, as we come towards the end of this conversation, what's one step that you might want to take for yourself? If there was just one thing that you could take away from today, I don't want you to try and change everything. And it may be just reflection, and that's okay. But my question to you is, what is one step that you could take, especially for those of you that recognize we may not be operating as authentically as we could? What's one step that you can take to be 10% more of your authentic self? Make a note. See what's coming up for you. I have some areas that may be relevant to you or may not, and that's okay. But I'd love to just introduce another poll into the space here. So my question is, which step will you focus on? And I have some options here for you. So will it be to speak up more? Who here stays silent in meetings or feels like they don't have a voice in the space? I was speaking to a leader yesterday, actually, who has such a vision, fantastic ideas, but just doesn't feel like her voice is valued. So the narrative that she is telling herself is, I am not valued. How true is that? If you value yourself and your voice, maybe we can give ourselves permission to speak up. Setting a healthy boundary. How often do you take the opportunity to share what's within your boundaries and what isn't? Are we honest about our boundaries? Do we have boundaries? And parents, I'm talking to you too. This very much comes up when I'm speaking to mothers and fathers as well. We often give so much to everyone, but how often do we just check into ourselves and go, what do I need? Because what I want us to recognize is that in order for you to truly serve, we need to take time to fill our own cup up. How many of you are pouring from an empty cup? It might be to stop proving your worth. How often do we spend our time feeling like we're not good enough? We're not valued enough. We're not knowledgeable enough. We're not experienced enough. We don't know enough. How true is that? How often do we honor our values? I used kindness as an example, but there are so many. Trust, authenticity, love, health, happiness. So I'd love to just launch another poll just for you to have a moment to share, and it may be another, and that's okay. And I believe you can select more than one.
Yes, they can.
Thank you.
I will leave them a few seconds more because I think they were waiting for you to go through all the options.
Yes,
I can tell you that the most selected one is honor my values at 34%. Then we have set up a boundary 24, speak up more 22, and stop proving my worth 16.
Yeah.
Honor my values actually going up.
Thank you, Gaia.
Okay, I think we can move on to the next one.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's incredible. And I really, really encourage you to do that. I want us to recognize that we want to stop performing and start leading. And honoring your values is truly going to allow you to do that. What I want us to recognize here is the future of leadership in football won't be driven by ego, but it will be driven by people who are willing to look at themselves first. And so thank you for all of you for being here and participating in that poll and taking the time to just start with that. And as it says here, because the moment you stop performing is the moment that you can start leading authentically. Thank you so much to everyone for being here and for participating. Gaia, I'm going to hand back over to you now, and I believe that we will have some time, I think, for a Q&A potentially.
Yeah, if you have any question, you can type it in the Q&A chat. I don't think for the moment.
That's okay. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you so much.
Nisha, that was amazing. Thank you so much. That was just a brilliant session from start to finish. Alignment over performance and staying true to your values is something that resonated with me, and not feeling as if I have to prove my worth as well, which I feel I've done throughout my entire career. So I'll be fascinated to know how everybody else has felt as well. There were so many points to think on after that session. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Does anybody have any questions? I think we were going to open up to a question and answer session if anybody had any questions. I think we were going to see whether anybody had anything, if you'd like to write it in the chat.
And also, if not, that's absolutely fine. What I'll do, Faye, is I will stick around for the rest of this session, so they may come up later, and I'm happy to answer any.
Wonderful.
Later.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nisha. Have a think in the meantime. We are really fortunate to have Professor Laura McAllister with us today. I've been lucky enough to interview Laura on a few occasions, and she's one of the most passionate leaders that I've ever met. Morning, Laura.
Good morning, Bore da, Faye. Lovely to be joining you.
Bona da, indeed. That's Welsh, by the way, in case anybody doesn't know. And we will talk a lot about Wales, I feel, in part of this conversation, Laura. But let's get straight into it, shall we? Because what I find really fascinating is that you've described yourself as an introvert by personality, and yet here you are, UEFA Vice President, in rooms full of powerful people, not just being in those rooms, but making your voice well and truly heard. How do you learn to do that? And does it still take effort from an introvert's point of view?
Oh, very much so, yes. And I don't think I'd quite computed how much of an introvert I was until I got into some of these roles where I found myself being increasingly uncomfortable with an environment that is effectively constructed for extrovert types. And it made me do a lot of self-analysis, a lot of kind of looking at myself and recognizing who I was as a person, because I think that last session from Nisha was really interesting around authenticity, and I certainly don't want to pour cold water on any of that because I think it's spot on. But unfortunately, the environments in which we work often don't create the optimum conditions for authentic leadership. And until we change those, there are moments where we simply aren't able to be entirely authentic. And I feel that I'm very much in that space at the moment. And that pains me. But I hope I'm doing my bit to change it from within as well. So I think in answer to your question, Faye, it's been a kind of journey of recognition and self-evaluation for me. And I can't honestly say with my hand on my heart that I'm able to be the real me in every space that I now operate in European football. But I think every day that goes by, I'm expanding the kind of authentic contribution of myself. And I hope that because we're having to do it now as women in leadership positions, it will make it easier for the women who come after us, which I hope will be all of you, men and women on the call today.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? That we're still not able to make that transition into being fully authentic at the moment because the parameters don't fully allow us. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about picking your battles and how important that is. And there is a bit of a fine line. But I want to talk about football and what it means to you, because I know you grew up as a Cardiff City fan. You were at your first game when you were 3 years old, your first international match aged 4. I'm trying with my son to get him. I took him at 6 months old, but it's only now he's 4 that he's been to see Luton Town, which is my team. But football's always been inside you, hasn't it? But the path from passionate fan to UEFA vice president is not obvious in the slightest. But what were the pivotal moments when you chose to step forward rather than kind of stay on the sidelines and take this path?
Yeah, well, thank you for referencing my football club, Cardiff City, who I hope will be promoted this weekend. And maybe Luton will join us in the near future, I hope, Faye, back in the Championship. But yeah, look, I feel like football is my heritage. It's shaped my life in every respect, really. You know, I've always been a football fan, and I remember that now when obviously I'm sitting in the posh seats at games with UEFA. But I always try and think about things from a fan's perspective, because when I go and see Cardiff City when I'm home, which is not all the time, I've got a season ticket in the family stand. So I go with my two daughters and my sister and her daughter, and lots of our friends and family around us. So I experience the proper conditions for being a fan. And I think that's quite important as a metaphor for how you keep your feet on the ground, because it would be very easy in the roles that I have now to get carried away with the grandeur and the VIP treatment and so on. But for me, that's the least important part of what I'm doing, because I never really wanted to be in a leadership position in UEFA just to get the benefits and the joy and the wonderful experiences of watching the best games in the world. That's great, by the way. But much more important for me was always to make a contribution that would modernize and change football. So I'm doing my best to do that. But going back to your question about the journey, I think I never really planned anything in my career. I'm not a kind of great strategic career planner, and I'm still not, actually. You know, I'm much more kind of instinctive about what lands in my inbox or on my lap. But there are also burning desires to remedy inequalities generally in life and in football. And that's been something that's motivated me from a very young age. And I'm sure that comes from one's own family upbringing and big influences around us, including, in my case, my mother and my grandparents. But I never thought I couldn't be what I'm doing now either. I've never had a shortage of belief in myself, and not because I think that I'm better than anyone else out there in the world of European football, but I know I'm as good, and therefore I think for me it's been a case of trying to utilize the abilities I do have and minimize the things I know I'm not so good at, because nobody is perfect across the board. Nobody knows how to do everything superbly, and sometimes we beat ourselves up for trying to be, 100% perfection instead of just being 75% very good. And often very good is quite enough, to be honest. So we need to get our heads around that a little bit more. So I've always had a kind of belief that I could contribute. And I've also had a sense of the need to always speak up and to say things when it's important. We just had a couple of discussions around that in the last session. And I don't want to leap on too much to what we'll cover later, but I've had to rein that in a little bit, if I'm being really honest, because my instinct is to say what I'm thinking and in a polite way, hopefully a diplomatic way. But in the environments that I'm working in now, sometimes one has to bite one's tongue or to keep a little bit more reserved until the right moment. But I think in my own journey, I've never been frightened to take that moment to say something about what needs to change. And therefore, I guess, even from a very early age, I was kind of conscious that I could make a contribution. But I'm not arrogant. I don't think for a moment that I'm the only person that could do the job I'm doing now. And I'm not the only woman who could do it. There are really talented women out there. Some of them will be on the call today. And my job, as I see it, is to pave the way to make it easier for them to do the job I'm doing in a much more improved environment.
Yeah, arrogant is never a word that I would attribute to you, I have to say.
Oh, good. Thank you.
And that's actually really interesting you say that about having a purpose to be where you are as opposed to a desire to be,
Yes.
having prawn sandwiches and traveling the world. That's really important, because that authenticity piece again will show up in your work because of that. I want to talk about resilience, because there'll be people on the call that know this and others that might not, but you stood for FIFA Council and lost narrowly to the incumbent, and then came back to stand for the UEFA Executive Committee, where you were elected unopposed. You've talked about building resilience but that it still hurts, and I've spoken to you about that before. But what's the real internal conversation that you have with yourself after a defeat like that? How do you kind of find the sweet spot really between resilience and then not caring too much and parking it and moving on?
Well, I really hate losing, and anybody who has done any sport with me, I still play five-a-side in our vets football team, Cardiff City Ladies, and I play squash every week with Lowry, my good friend, who's now the chief executive of Bristol City. And Lowry will tell you, and anybody else will tell you, I really hate losing. But that's the sports women in us, isn't it? You know, we're not used to it and we don't like it. And that's a good thing, actually, as long as you can rein it. As you say, Faye, this is about finding the sweet spot between being really annoyed at losing and using it as a platform for what you do next. And that's definitely the case with my defeat in the FIFA election in, I think it was 2021. I lost to Evelina Cristolin, who is the Italian incumbent. And Evelyn has become a good friend of mine. She's stepped down from FIFA now. But at the time, I think it was a really important moment for the representation of women in the game, because Evelina represented a different type of woman who was being promoted to fill a quota seat on FIFA Council. We hadn't had, apart from Karen Espeland in UEFA from Norway, we hadn't had women who were former players or coaches or referees or administrators who knew the game inside out, who were articulate about the game, not just women's football, by the way, but football per se. We hadn't had those type of women put their hands up and say, look, you know, I can do this job just as well as the men who are there, and probably better. And so it was quite hurtful for me, because I put myself in that category. But I got a grip of it pretty quickly, because I knew, you know, beating an incumbent in football is really hard in an election. You know, I was an unknown at the time. Nobody knew Laura McAllister from Wales, you know, so I was standing against a powerful football nation, you know, so everything was against me. But yet we came within 6 votes of winning the election. And that gave me quite a boost. You know, I thought, yes, I'm disappointed, and yes, I feel a bit disillusioned. But equally, I think the tide is starting to turn. So instead of throwing my toys out to the pram and saying, you know, that's it, you know, I'm done with this concept, I thought, well, no, this is actually in closer grasp than it might have been for any other time. So I kept going. I spoke to colleagues at UEFA, including the president, Alexander Shefrin, and I said, look, you know, I accept the defeat because it's a fair and democratic election, but what can I do now to get greater experience, get greater exposure, build better networks? And to be fair to Alexander and to lots of the team at UEFA, they gave me plenty of projects to work on. I worked on the Convention on European Football. I chaired some sessions on the women's game at that. I was already on UEFA's Women's Football Committee, but I took on other strategic roles. And I think it just helped me prove to colleagues there that I was a team player, that it wasn't about me. Back to our question earlier, I wasn't doing it because I wanted the kind of self-aggrandizement of being a UEFA Exco member. I'm afraid there's too much of that in football, by the way, you know, the kind of idea that, you know, once you reach a position, you're there and that's it. You've achieved the pinnacle. You know, we're there to do something, not to just be there. And if there's an interpretation in anything, I'm not, you know, casting aspersions about anybody here, but if somebody thinks that just getting to an elected or appointed position is the end of the journey, they need to have a long, hard look at themselves, because we're there to do something to change and improve the game. So I think that's how I went about it, Faye. And obviously, you don't go into an election unopposed unless you've got the support of people around you. And I felt by the time I did stand for Exco in 2023, because my term finishes next year, so my first term in the Congress next year, by the time I stood, I think people respected what I was standing on, you know, the platform. So in a way, I was in a better position than when I stood first of all. And, you know, who knows? I mean, somebody may stand against me in the election next year, and I'd be perfectly relaxed about that, by the way. You know, in fact, I think it's a good thing. But I hope I've built up enough support and belief from my colleagues to think that I'm making a contribution. And that's really what I was aiming at all along.
Yeah, not just that, you've built up that support because you've built the credibility in the first place, and actually going to the UEFA president and asking what you can do more and how you can help is a perfect way of doing that. But that actually takes a lot of a lot of bravery and belief in yourself. Going back to the choosing your battles wisely, and alongside the credibility build before you can drive change, which is what you've been doing. Now that Lisa Klaveness has joined you on the EXCO, how much does having an ally in the room change the calculation of the kind of battles that you decide to choose, or is the approach pretty much the same?
Well, firstly, it's been an absolute delight to have Lisa there with me. I mean, she's a good friend of mine. I've got the utmost respect for her as a football person, never mind as a feminist and somebody who's championed the women's game and women in football. So we're good friends, and that helps because it can be quite lonely. You know, I was the only woman on EXCO for 2.5 years. And no disrespect to my male colleagues, because a lot of those are my friends as well. But it, you know, being in an all-male environment all of the time is quite draining. And they don't men in those spaces don't mean to be exclusionary, but they can be without thinking about it. And one thing I would say before I talk about the fighting the battles is that I think this is something that men in football should consider, the way in which inadvertently they're excluding people who don't look and sound and feel like them. Sometimes it can be quite a physical thing, you know, because men tend to be bigger than women, or, you know, dominate a space and wear the same clothes, you know, suits of a certain kind. I mean, I'm not, you know, criticizing anybody here, but it's something that men could usefully do if they believe in equality and diversity. You know, they could think to themselves, am I doing enough to incorporate the women in this room in a really positive way? So, you know, if there's a woman there that is new to the space, you know, why not just go up to her and ask her what her background is and bring her into a group to talk? Because men have much easier sponsorship and networking than women do, because they're already in the powerful positions. So I take that upon myself, because I'm very cognizant that I am now in a powerful position. So I have to use that responsibly by making sure that I reach out to women and men who are not necessarily known in that group. But I think men could do more of that, and it would be a real contribution to, you know, how women become more networked in our sport. But going back to your point about fighting battles, that's a really critical learning for me, and it hasn't happened just since I've been on EXCO. You know, in all of the roles I've carried out in the university sector and in sport more generally, I realized that governance is a marathon, not a sprint. And if you are in that space, you have to really show some patience and slow down your natural instinct to try and engineer change quickly. And it's really frustrating. I'm not, you know, saying for a moment that this isn't painful. And there are times when to keep your mouth shut when you know something is fundamentally wrong feels wrong to yourself. But if you've got a sense of purpose, if you've got a really clear idea of why you're there and what your medium and long-term goals are, short-term wins can sometimes be counterproductive. So speaking up in a way that makes you feel better, and maybe some of your allies and, you know, your audience feel better, is great. You get a quick power rush and you know, it's a sugar rush, isn't it? Of thinking, yeah, I've done something useful. But if that undermines your medium and longer term aims, it has no purpose whatsoever. And it's self-indulgent, basically. So I'm very conscious now that I have to weigh up when and how to contribute to discussions that are important, because you don't get many opportunities in these rooms to say exactly what you'd like to say. So you've got to be ready to say it, and you've got to choose your optimum moment for contributing. And sometimes being silent is an active contribution. And I say that to people all the time. I'll often have told people before a debate that I am against a decision, but I recognize that that's the way the decision is going to go. So me speaking up against it will only prohibit the next important thing I want to achieve, usually for women in sport or women in football. So it's a kind of game, and I don't take any pleasure in describing it as a game, because it shouldn't be. But unfortunately, governance in any sector is imperfect. And if that's what we've got to do to make the gains we need to make for other women in football, then that's what we do. And it's something that Lisa and I speak a lot about now, because whilst we're really good friends, we're very different personalities. You know, Lisa is keener to speak out I'm keener to be tactical, let's say, but we work very well together because, you know, we've got utmost respect for each other, and we know that we're trying to act as a team with other good men in Exco as well. So it's kind of, it sounds awful because that's a kind of performative leadership that Nisha's just been telling everyone we shouldn't be indulging in. But as I said at the beginning, you can only work in the space you're in, and we don't have perfect leadership conditions for us at the moment in football. Therefore, we need to make changes that will create better conditions in the future.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to challenge you on something, because earlier on you said that you weren't strategic, but that is very strategic what you're what you're talking about there, and it is a tactic that you have. You have to be a bit smart. You have to look, you know, almost like more of a chess move, a few steps ahead. And you know, it is very difficult to then align that with authenticity when everything in your gut tells you not to do that and to jump in feet first and say I don't agree with that. But you're exactly right. That doesn't actually lead to change. And I've heard you say before that women in leadership actually risk being quickly labelled as aggressive or not collaborative, and that's another reason to almost stay quiet in some moments. And you know, as you've demonstrated already, being the expert in the room is one way to build the credibility that then protects you from that completely. So with that in mind, how do you stay grounded in your knowledge base while also continuing to then grow beyond it?
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, when I said that I wasn't strategic, I meant more about my own career, you know, that I wasn't sort of thinking 3 steps ahead. But I am actually a very strategic person in a professional environment because that's the way my brain works. You know, I kind of like to think in stages and how you get from A to G or H, never mind A to B. So I like that kind of way of thinking. But your question about being grounded, I mean, I think we as women in football need to be far more confident about what we know instead of dwelling on things that we don't know or are not so good at. Because honestly, you know, my experience of working not just with UEFA but with FIFA and obviously the EFC and FIFPro and all the other organisations, European leagues and all the federations, some of the most talented people I meet are the women in the room, and sometimes they're in fairly junior, you know, I'm not a hierarchical person, but juniorish roles in those organizations, yet they're patently the most talented people. And whenever I'm arguing now, as I am, for gender reforms in football and, you know, quotas for women, because if anybody doesn't believe in quotas, you need to really wake up and smell the coffee, because there is no meritocracy in football. You know, there's no, if you look around you and wonder why some of the men are in significant positions, it's not because they're necessarily the best person. Some of them are, but not all of them. And it's about so much more in terms of, you know, patronage and support and sponsorship and all the rest of it. So a meritocracy is just a necessity. Quotas are just a necessity at the moment because we don't have a meritocracy. If we did, the women that I see every day, I've just come back from Cyprus from the EU Sports Summit, met lots of really talented women in sport there. If we had a meritocracy, those women would be in positions of greater influence and power. So I would ask everybody here, women and men, to really kind of be a bit more confident about their own abilities and the talents that they do have, rather than always dwelling on the things that they need to improve. I could give you now 20 things that I'm not very good at, okay? And 15 of them are really irrelevant to what I'm doing now, but 5 I probably should invest more time and effort in. But I don't have the time to do that necessarily now. So instead of that, I'm concentrating on the things I am good at and making sure that I, you know, bring that to the boardroom and the table and so on. When it comes to football, women have a different take, not always, but mostly, because they have experiential differences in how they've had football through their careers. It might be they didn't have opportunities to play or to referee or to coach, or it might be that they were elite players that felt that they didn't get exactly the kind of support that they should have had. So the experiential diversity that women bring is really, really important. It's not just by virtue of being a woman, you know, it's not about representation and identity per se. It's about the cognitive kind of awareness that women have differently. whatever we think, the majority of childcare in the world is still done by women. And it's great that men are contributing more, but that's still a fact. So women are closer to children's experiences of sport in school and extracurricular and so on. So all of that is missing if we don't have women around the table. And we need to value that more. You know, yes, it's great to be a highfalutin accountant or legal expert on sports broadcasting or commercial rights. Okay, all important things. It's just as important to understand why girls don't take part in sport as much as boys do, and why girls continue to drop out at 12 and 16 as they did nearly 50 years ago. And women can offer something very different to that space as well. I'm not pigeonholing women, by the way, as being only concerned with family and development and all the rest of it. Some of the best legal minds I've met in football and commercial and media, like yourself, Faye, have been women. But let's not downplay the other important qualities that women bring to the table, because for me, they're just as important as those professional skills.
Well, it's just important to have people who genuinely think differently, isn't it?
Yeah,
you and I have
exactly.
spoken about this before, and you mentioned cognitive diversity there. It isn't just about gender and ethnic representation, but what in your experience does it feel like to be in a room that has genuine cognitive diversity versus diversity that is just on paper, effectively?
Well, I'm not often in that space at the moment, to be perfectly honest, because I think football's got a way to go until we can claim confidently that we have that kind of environment. But I have been in that space in other roles that I've done in my public life, and it can be really invigorating and energizing and exciting, because we are being tested. And I think if you've got a critical mind and a critical brain, then what you want more than anything is for people to challenge you in order for you to become better. And I think I like to have that kind of open mind to challenge. You know, I don't mind anybody, whoever they are, saying to me, "Oh, I thought you didn't do so well then," or "You made a, poor speech," or "You didn't express yourself well." As long as they give a good rationale that I can learn from, then I think that's positive, But we tiptoe around these things in leadership environments because we almost have too much. We have too much respect, and we almost allow leaders to go unchallenged and criticized, and I don't think that's really healthy. It's important to be polite always and to be diplomatic and to be respectful, but we should all be open to challenge, because that's a fundamental of getting better. And we have to open ourselves up by showing that we can challenge, but we can accept challenge as well. And I try and do that. Maybe I don't do enough, but I try and do that in things I do. And that's what I think a really cognitive, diverse environment would bring. If we could create those conditions in football, I think we'd be confident enough to talk about the women's game in a different way to the way we talk about the men's game. There's always a risk in football that we think the men's game is the perfect prototype, and therefore the women's game has to follow it exactly. It doesn't. There are loads of flaws in the men's game. There are loads of mistakes that have been made historically. Why do we want to repeat the mistakes? We can do things differently. And one of the things I always say about the difference between the women and men's game is the players. I mean, for a start, the female players are without doubt more politically engaged in the future of their sport than male players have ever been. And I know more male players are starting to wake up and talk out about racism and equality and all the rest of it. But that's kind of almost natural to women players. And they can bring so much to the debates that we're having, and yet they're not around the boardroom table. And that's what frustrates me. So much potential amongst the playing base, and we're doing things around that now. But these are the people we need to get into boardrooms. I mean, they don't all want to be administrators, but some of them do. But we have to create the conditions for them to do that.
Yeah, two things I want to pick up on there. Firstly, you slightly lost my train of thought. Being authentic, this is what happens when you're slightly sleep deprived. You mentioned in terms of yes people, and there are many leaders, and particularly I've found within football and within media, who like to surround themselves with yes people because they don't like to be challenged, and perhaps it is a leadership skill that needs to be appreciated more, that challenge is something that should be invited in and seen as useful. You have to be challenged as a leader. If you surround yourself by yes people, then there's something narcissistic and egotistical about that, that then isn't going to improve things going forward. But you also mentioned that the parallels and the differences between the men's and the women's game. And I'm always involved in many conversations about how the women's game shouldn't just try to replicate what the men's game has done and is doing. It has to identify what's genuinely unique about it and then build from there. And I know you feel the same about that as well. But for the women in this network working inside football associations right now, what does that actually mean in practice for how they do their jobs?
Well, taking the two together, Faye, I think it before anyone can speak out, they have to be reassured that they won't be penalised for speaking out. And as you say, unfortunately, there are lots of people involved in sports governance generally who are not used to being challenged or criticised, even if that's in a very constructive and positive way. So I think the culture of organisations is really very important. And I don't know if anybody's got this entirely right, but we all have to chip away at trying to construct a culture that is self-reflective and that is has challenge built into it. And if that isn't the case in your organisation, kind of strip away some of the nonsense that people do about organisations and culture. There's a lot of stuff that's spoken, which quite frankly, we've gone over this ground millions of times. You need to cut to the chase, I think, and say, okay, let's test it out. Let's have a period of time where, everyone can say what they think in a controlled environment and see whether that, changes the culture over time. So I think I'd like to see a bit more really kind of trenchant improvements around organizational culture and so on. And then I guess on the women's game, I think it's about being imaginative, and we need to think about that in the context of UEFA's strategy Unstoppable, which takes us up to 2030, and we talk there about €1 billion investment in the game, which we will meet because you look at the Euros last year, €41 million prize money, double what was there in England in the previous tournament. Massive progress and really positive. But I think we need to have stopping off points in any strategy where we say, is there something we're missing? Because when we draft a strategy, taking Unstoppable, that was back in 2022. Well, look, this is 4 years ago. Look how the game has grown in 4 years, and it will grow again in the next 2 and 4 years and 6 years. So I think it's about being imaginative, not closing our eyes and ears to a way of doing things in football that has always been there, and actually bringing in voices who are external to football to offer us a kind of really objective, critical take. I love that. I love it when somebody comes in, not just from another sport, but from completely outside our world and points out the obvious in what we've missed. So I think it's about being really open to challenge in that way. And we'll only become stronger if we do that.
Yeah, just coming outside of the bubble a little bit.
Definitely.
Makes things much clearer. Now, I did promise you at the beginning we were going to talk Wales, didn't I? And you're Welsh, quelle surprise. I know that's French, but you speak Welsh.
Can't miss that.
Your children are being educated in Welsh as well. And you've said your identity is fundamental and it makes you distinctive, keeps you grounded. So how important has staying connected to where you come from been in terms of your ability to lead authentically at the highest levels of European football?
I think it's been absolutely critical. I mean, I said that slightly tongue-in-cheek, what my Welsh identity is the most important identity I have. But I talk about that in a sporting context, obviously playing for Wales, now representing Wales in the top tier of European Football Administration. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to people in our nation, because we're a small nation. But by the way, most nations are small. There's very few very big nations. Most of us are in that middle space, of between say 2 million and 10 million people. That's more the norm than the big countries in Europe. And we're every bit as knowledgeable and good as any of the big countries. So I've got a kind of inner confidence that comes from that. But it means a lot to us. People, as I say, I go to games as a fan, or when I go to Welsh internationals, people actually come up and ask me really good questions about what we're doing in UEFA. sometimes better questions than you get from a kind of political environment. They want to know what's happening with revisions to qualifications or to investment in the women's game or to sustainability in football. And that's very, very important to me. But keeping myself grounded is relatively easy because, as you know, Faith, you've got a family and you've got kids. They don't care what job you're doing and whether you're important or not. For them, you're just their mum, and all they want to know is that you're there to, help and look after and nurture them. So that keeps you grounded, your family, obviously, but I'm still really friends with the same people that I was friends with when I was growing up. I'm not, I think it goes back to my introvert personality. I'm not somebody who likes big crowds of people. I like my close group of friends. I like sort of one-to-ones and small groups, and I like going to the places I've always liked going to. So I guess I'm probably more naturally a person who doesn't enjoy the trappings of power, if you like, that some people do. There's often games I go to, and particularly in the Euros last year. I mean, obviously Wales were there, so I was there with Wales for the 3 group games. But I would have enjoyed those much more if I could have gone with my Welsh shirt on and had a beer with my friends before, rather than go in official capacity. But look, you can't have everything, and that's just the way it is. So I don't find it hard to keep myself grounded. I remind myself all the time that I'm very, very lucky to do this job. It's a wonderful opportunity, and it's something that I take very, very seriously, and I'm enjoying immensely. But I know it'll come to an end, and after that, I still have my life to go back to. It won't destroy me when it comes to an end. Hopefully I'll be ready by then to go back to what I would normally be doing.
Yeah, I listen, I agree with you, and I really wish there were more people in football that had that same relationship with power, that it didn't define them, and I think that's really, really important. And actually, that leads us really nicely onto the last question that I have for you, because you've said that people will always remember how you made them feel, not what you said or ultimately what you did, and that your main ambition is simply to be recognised as a decent person who puts others first. I can see that you live that ambition every single day. For the women in the room who are building their own leadership identity right at this moment, what single piece of advice would you give them for not losing yourself along the way?
Oh, well, thank you for those kind comments. First of all, I'm glad that's how it seems, because I think this is so crucial, and I am very, very kind of I think a lot about that, and I make sure that I hope I treat everyone with the same respect and time and attention, whether they're the president of FIFA or, someone who's working at a administrative level in a federation. They're as important in the development of the game. And I think sometimes we need to remind ourselves of that, because it is easy to get carried away by the allure of power and prominence and fame and all the rest of it with some of the people you meet. But I've got my natural instinct is to treat people the same, so I don't find that particularly hard. I would definitely advocate some thinking around that for colleagues. Don't assume that because somebody is the most celebrated or powerful person in the room, they're necessarily the person you should try and speak to. Often there will be other people in the room who are going to be more helpful to you and more constructive in what they talk to you about. And I guess I would say to people as well, be patient about the journey you're on, because I think at times in my journey I tried to rush it too much, and I got frustrated if things didn't happen in the timescale I wanted them to be. But a good dose of realism and acceptance that football governance needs to improve. We all acknowledge that in a whole host of ways, and we're actors in that journey. We're even in our lifetimes, we may not have the perfect exemplary model of football governance, but if we've made a contribution to changing it, then we will have done a good job. And so be patient. Don't expect to be able to go into any space and change things overnight. It won't happen like that, but quantify the small changes you have, because sometimes there's a saying, and I'm paraphrasing, very small changes contribute to the revolution. There becomes a point where you accumulate so many small changes in an organizational structure that you get to the tipping point of it being a really radical transformation. And so if we're all making small changes that cumulative, we'll get to a point where there'll be a real overhaul of football governance that will make it better for everyone. And if you can make a contribution, be mindful of that and recognize what you're doing in that equation.
Brilliant. Laura, that was absolutely fascinating. I always love talking to
Thank
you,
you.
and I hope that all the women and the men in the room have really enjoyed that, because I think it's important. I know I've specifically on a couple of occasions mentioned the women in the room, but it's equally as important that the men in the room feel that they can take some of your learnings on as well. So thank you so much. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Thank you, Faye.
Thank you as well, all of you, for your contributions, for staying on the call. I really hope that you've taken a lot away from what both Nisha and Laura have been telling you. Please tell us as well whether you enjoyed it, because just a reminder for you to complete that survey that Gaia mentioned at the beginning. I think we're going to put the QR code up again for you before we go. Yeah, there you go. There it is, right on cue. There's also going to be a link in the chat as well, so you can click on that and that will take you to the survey as well. But have a wonderful weekend, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.